Hello and welcome to the Herdline Podcast, hosted by Trace Johnson and the Herds Headset. Thank you so much for tuning into today's episode where the Headset and Trace talk all things Marshall athletics. Be sure to follow us on X and subscribe to us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, or wherever else you listen to podcasts. Now, sit back, relax, and let's talk the herd.
Welcome back to the Herdline Podcast. Trace with you as well as the Herds Headset. Ready for a very exciting episode today where we're reaching back into our episodes, our series of episodes where we look at former Marshall football coaches. What we're doing right now is football. And we've hit on a couple coaches already. We've touched on the Charles Huff era and the Doc Holliday era. Well, now we're going back a little bit farther to the Mark Snyder era, which is one that people are still trying to forget probably, but we were just saying before we started recording, I don't think we need to, but I don't think any era of Marshall football should just be forgotten because I think there's a lot to be said about a lot of different eras that even if it's not with the most success, I think there's still a lot to talk about. And I think, we really got to talk about some things there. And as well as that, we're going to talk about, we've been a couple weeks since we've had any updates on baseball results and softball results and things like that. So we're going to try to get some house cleaning stuff done there as well and get ready for getting close to the end of softball's almost finished now. So that they got a lot to play for coming up. We'll get into that too. But before we get into it, man, I know we both kind of had some physical ailments here lately, but how's it been going for you?
Yeah, been going good, I guess. Like you said, you had your wisdom teeth taken out just the other day, and I'm sure that there's some really great videos floating around somewhere that maybe one day will be made public.
Yeah.
And then, man, I had kidney stones just the other day, and it was miserable.
Yeah.
It is the worst pain in my entire life, but we're past that. We are now heading forward. And this is an exciting episode today. This is literally an episode that really, I think, is a long time in the making. Nobody, like you said, talks about Mark Snyder or his era. And really, a lot of the players that came through here are forgotten that he coached and that we saw become absolute stars and even NFL talent. Yeah. And so it's exciting to be able to spend a little bit of time today talking about all that went on in the Mark Snyder era. And really trying to give a case to where, it was a rough time for the program, sure, but it wasn't as bad as what a lot of people think it was. So that's going to be a great episode. I'm excited about it. Looking forward to where our conversation will lead. It's going to be a good one today.
For sure. I'm very much looking forward to getting into this because it's easy to talk about somebody like Bob Pruitt or Doc Holliday or, because they won a lot of games. It's easy to talk about those, but it's not always easy to talk about the coach that had a losing record about every year for 5 years, or mostly every 5 years. So that's going to be very interesting. It's going to be interesting to see where that conversation takes us and how the narratives kind of change a little bit now, because, back in the day, I remember thinking, we just was totally just writing him off as just a horrible coach and a failure and everything else. And on paper, yeah, I guess you could say that, but there's a lot more to it that meets the eye. So we're going to get into that. But before we get started with that, we're going to look back at a little bit of news over the last couple of weeks, because the last episode we did obviously was just with Tony Gibson. Again, huge shout out to him for coming on again. Absolutely great episode. So we didn't get to talk about any of the updates and the news and things, prior to that. So we're going to do that real quick here. Looking a little bit at the transfer portal for men's and women's basketball. It's been very lively lately. I'll be honest, I have not kept up with it very well at all. So I think later on we'll probably just do an episode where we talk more about each individual player that we signed and so forth, because I do not have them all written down at all. I'm kind of slacking there. I have a lot of other stuff written down, but that one has not been copied down yet. However, do have to mention about Tamaya Lewis-Utsi, how she ended up going to Florida State for her graduate year. I kind of saw that coming. I mean, after the year she had, there was really no doubt she was going to go somewhere big. And I mean, that's a great opportunity. So you can't really falter for that. She did just amazing stuff at Marshall, her 1 year there. So she's going to Florida State, which, again, not that surprising to me. The men's basketball team had a lot of portal entries. Noah Oshudi, Landon Joseph, we talked about that. Shamari Huji, Caleb Hollenbeck, all those guys portal. And then they also lost assistant coach Rob Fulford to the College of Charleston. which was kind of a surprising move, I guess. I don't know. Maybe they just wanted to move it into a different direction. Maybe that's more of closer to home for him. I don't know. There's some tie there. Maybe I have no clue. And the College of Charleston's typically a good basketball program, so I don't know. But we have been signing quite a few guys. Again, I have not been keeping up with it as closely as I should have. But I know we just signed a kid from Tulane. I know we've signed some other kids, local, kind of even a local guy from Concord as well. So another guy from Canada. That Corny loves that Canada pipeline. He's been hitting on that hard the last couple of years. So I think the roster is rounding into shape pretty well, honestly. We'll see how it pans out moving forward. But before we get into softball and baseball, if you got anything to add about that portal stuff? What do you think about all that?
Yeah, I mean, this is a very unique time in college sports. We've talked about it many of times in our episodes and prior. This is basically the new Thunder and Herd basketball team. Everybody's gone except for Bryce Slay, I believe.
Yeah.
I think everybody else on the roster literally is gone, if I'm not mistaken.
Crazy.
So that's definitely a challenge. It's very different. But I will say that Corny's doing a pretty good job of getting the team together. I did see that kid from Elon. He is a guard and a former 4-star recruit out of high school. So that's exciting. That's a good pickup. Absolutely, that we were able to get. Also, like you said, that guy from Tulane appeared in, I believe, 17 games with the Green Wave. And so he is a, proven player, big man too, 6'8", 215. So we definitely need more of that. And then also we got that kid, Colt Langdon from NC State. And he's a 3-star prospect, and he had offers from LSU, Ole Miss, Virginia Tech, West Virginia, and et cetera. So, and he played 6 games as a freshman there for the Wolfpack. So, got some guys coming in finally. We're going to have a team next year. It's not that, but it's just a matter of, can they gel together? Can they get all the right pieces? Because, we're not just filling holes. We're filling an entire roster. Everybody is needed. All hands on deck here. So it's interesting to see. Got a couple of names that you can be excited about, but, looking forward to seeing what else is in store as we try and round up our basketball roster here very soon.
Absolutely. And I even failed to mention, the women's team's going out and signing a lot of people too. Julie Falks knows how to recruit. She knows how to develop talent and bring them in. And, we've seen that already. So exciting to see what she can do there. Even though she is she's losing a couple key players, obviously, or more than a couple key players, but she lost a lot of key players last year too. And then she rebounded with a 28-win season. So I think she'll be fine there. I don't worry about that in the slightest. Corny, like you said, he's had to do this twice now. Basically just totally rebuild a roster in the last couple of years. So we'll see what he does, but it's a big year, I think, for him coming up. They've been good, but they've just been at a level. They have not been past a level. They've just been good. And, you got to get to a point where you're a conference championship contender. And they were, but they just didn't win it. So it's you've got to get to the point where, you're breaking through and doing that kind of stuff. So hopefully these guys can help us get to that point.
And I'm telling you what, in regards to that too, it's really tough to accurately describe how good of a job Corny is doing just season by season because of just how much turnover there's been.
Yeah.
Realistically, this year, in all reality, is what a rebuilding year would look like as far as a new coach coming in. So he's been here a couple of years, lost that much talent in one season. That's not good. That's not a good look on the program, not a good look on him. And so it's going to be a really big season with a roster that is going to more than likely be a incoming coach roster.
Mm-hmm.
So it's going to be really interesting to see if, he can shock the world here, because I'm all for it. I'm rooting for him. I wish him nothing but the best. However, all things considering, we said kind of at the end of this season, this is kind of a put up or shut up season. Are we going to really take that next step, or are we just going to stay where we're at, or are we going to regress? So, it's a big season, all things considering.
Very big season. And, you don't want to, if you don't, it's kind of hard to expect going in. I expect to see a championship and a March Madness bid and all this other stuff. That's hard to expect considering it's happened one time in the last 40 years. But I'm saying that he can't, like you said, regress. I don't think you can regress. So we'll see what happens. He's just got to at least be where he's been the last couple of years, hopefully, because then at least that.
I want to see postseason basketball.
Yes, yes,
I want to see NIT or something along those lines to where we're
yes.
not just done after the conference tournament, but we're able to play more basketball. Doesn't have
Right.
to be March Madness, although that is the goal, that's the dream, and all that good stuff. But just something. I think that is
Yeah.
really going to determine. It's going to determine the future of Corny Jackson here, Marshall.
Yeah, I mean, we like I said, when we saw there's such a huge difference between ending your season with a loss and ending it with a championship like the women's team did. That's just a night and day difference. So yeah, that's a big difference, being able to close out a season in the postseason and then go on a run potentially. So yeah, exciting thoughts to see what they can do in the future. Hopefully they start, hitting on a lot of that, and hopefully we can turn it around, but we'll see what happens. And on that note, we got to talk about bat and ball here again. We got some big games coming up, especially for softball. Softball, the last couple of weeks basically 2 weeks since we've talked about them, they've had some ups and downs. I'll be honest. I'm just going to go over some of these results that I have written down here since we've last talked about them. They lost to Ohio 4-2. They beat South Alabama 5-2 and 4-2, and then lost to South Alabama 4-2. So they won 2 out of 3 from South Alabama. And then, unfortunately, though, against Louisiana on the road, they did lose 2 out of those 3. They lost game 1, 3-2, and game 2, 5-3. But then they did salvage game 3 and won 3-2. So now, because of that, they sit at 36-14 overall and 16-5 in the Sun Belt. They also beat Eastern Kentucky 6-1 as well, but that was a non-conference game. So they are currently tied for first place in the Sun Belt with Louisiana Monroe at 16-5 in league play. So they have a 3-game homestand to close out the regular season, April 30th through May 2nd against James Madison. If they do good, if they do well there, win 2 or 3 or whatever the case is, they're the regular season champions. It's gotten a little bit closer than we would have liked, just because of they've had a little bit of ups and downs here lately. But they're still in great position to win the championship, be a top seed, have a chance to go on to postseason play. So hopefully they can turn that on there. We'll see what they do. Baseball's definitely been down here lately quite a bit. Ironically, the first game I have written down here is one of the best wins that they've had in a long time. 11-7 over Ohio State a couple weeks back was incredible. Greg Beals going back to Columbus and getting a big win over his former team was awesome. And then, unfortunately, though, after that, they lost 2 out of 3 to South Alabama. They beat them 6-2 in game 1, then lost 7-3 in game 2 and 4-1 in game 3. And then they lost really poorly to Morehead State at home, 11-2. I don't know what happened there. That was not a good performance at all. And then they had another the homestand 3-game series against Troy. Unfortunately, lost 2 of those 3 as well. Beat them in game 1, lost to them in game 2, and lost to them in game 3. So that's a trend that they've been doing here lately, is winning game 1s, but then losing the next 2. That's what they've done in the last 2 conference series. Tough there for sure. They currently sit at 19-23 overall, 10-11 in the Sun Belt. They have a lot to work to do if they want to get to that, Sun Belt tournament again. Jury's still out on that. They got a big set of games coming up at Morehead State tonight at the time of our recording right now, and then at Ohio tomorrow night at the time of this recording. Then they got 3 games at James Madison May 1st through 3rd. So they really got to start getting it turned on. We'll have to just hope for the best there, because they've really been struggling. Bryce Blevins has been playing amazing here lately, but it seems like outside of him, they haven't had a whole lot going on lately. So talk a little bit about softball, baseball, however you want to do it. Go ahead and talk about them a little bit.
Yeah, well, softball's, again, just they're an elite program that we've got here at Marshall. We're very lucky to be able to have a very consistently good softball program. Remember a couple of years back, they did some things very similar to what we're seeing this season. So this is a proven program. They've very healthy, and they're in prime position to be able to win the Sun Belt. So, I mean, that's exciting. That's great news. But then whenever we talk about baseball, it is a very different story. And I think the last time that we spoke about them a couple weeks back, we were talking about the importance of really every single series from this point onward is a must-win series.
Yeah.
You're starting to play the bottom tier of the Sun Belt. You've gotten past the most difficult portion of the schedule, so you need to win these games. And then losing 2 out of 3 to Troy is not a great look. Troy's not that good this season. So especially at home at that, so that was a very, very tough weekend. as you said, Bryce Blevins is elite. He is just continuing to go out every single week. He has great control. He has great stuff. Nobody really can figure him out, and that's great. But we just don't have a whole lot of people there to help him out. So it's a very kind of sobering season because we were excited. I remember one of the first episodes we had this year about baseball. We were talking about, man, this is going to be a great year. This is going to be a year that we take another leap forward and make some great noise in the Sun Belt. And what we've seen is that we have regressed some, and unless they win out, that's really going to be the entire summary of the season. So a little bit of a down season. I can't really put my finger on exactly what it was that led to all of these things because we got some solid guys and great talent on the team. Happy for Greg Bills too, winning that Ohio State game. That's got to be sweet. Going to your former employer and beating them. That's just fantastic. But really, other than that game in Virginia Tech, there has not been a marquee, exciting win on the entire season. And so lost some very winnable games. We're just not there yet, I guess. We just don't have the ability right now to put it all together. And so that's kind of frustrating. We are a growing baseball program. We're trying to get better year in and year out. These things do take time. But it is a little bit disappointing to see that we're not going to be at the same level at the end of the season as we were last year or this year. And what makes it even more frustrating is much of the talent that we had last season is still around. And some of the guys that we brought in, I would even say on paper, would have performed better than the guys that we had last year. So just a little frustrating. It's not the most ideal thing. However, it is what it is. And, they still got an opportunity to squeak in there in the conference championship, the tournament, I mean. And so we'll see if they're able to do that, But my expectations now have gone very, very low to where they were at the start of this season.
Yeah, you would definitely like to have seen them take a step up from because they had a good year last year, made some noise, beat some really good people, made the Sun Belt tournament. You would have liked to have seen them take another step from that. And I mean, there's still games left to play. And I know it's a game of momentum, just like sports in general, it's just a game of momentum. So if they can just start getting some lucky breaks, quite frankly, just baseball is a lot of 50-50 plays. Like it's a lot of breaks. Okay, that ball didn't land where it needed to. Oh, that ball got past the catcher. Oh, that, little things like really go a long way. So hopefully some of that can start turning in their favor. But they have lost some pretty excruciating games. I mean, they've had a lot of games where it's just been bad luck, unfortunate stuff, just them beating themselves a lot as well. So that's unfortunate, but hopefully they can get something going. I don't know, we're not a finished product yet. I mean, I don't think we came into this season thinking we were going to be a finished product, but we definitely have work to do for sure. We're still a growing program. It is what it is. The Sun Belt's got a lot of good programs in it. They're not just going to give us anything. We're going to have to earn everything we get. So we'll see what happens, but they got a chance, I think, still to make some noise. The softball, obviously, you're almost to a point where you're the conference champions. I mean, that's exciting. Hopefully they can go out on a high note regular season wise before they get to postseason play. But yeah, so it's an interesting time for both of those programs right now. You got one that's kind of trying to figure themselves out, trying to find their identity. And then you got one that's found their identity. They just have to capitalize on it. So, it's exciting regardless to see what's going to happen moving forward. But with that being said, there's a couple little other small notes I wanted to mention before we moved on to the Mark Snyder portion of the episode. Had to mention about 2 Marshall football players getting invited to rookie mini camps. Had to talk about that. Cam Smith invited to the Chiefs rookie mini camp, as well as Floyd Lacey to the Patriots rookie mini camp. So congratulations to those 2 guys. Hopefully they take full advantage of those opportunities. They were really good players for us last year, especially Floyd Lacey. Man, he was something else. So that'd be great to see them get a chance to, make some noise there, maybe have a chance to make the roster or the practice, whatever. I don't know how it works, but at least get a chance because they're getting it. So congratulations to those 2 guys for sure. But On that note, we are ready to move on to the next portion of our looking back at head coaches series. We already talked about it, and it's time to really dive into it a little bit more here. A lot more, actually. The Mark Snyder era was a bad run. Obviously, it was on paper, with the results, it was just not a very good run. But I think there's a lot, like I said, I think there's a lot more to talk about and to dissect about that era that people just kind of seem to forget about. And that's what we're here to do. To preface it all, to start with, you got to start with the fact that Bob Pruitt just abruptly retired during, like, right before spring practice. He retired in like April of 2005. I mean, that's not very much time at all to get a coach hired. I mean, that was a pretty bad time to like. It's kind of hard to say it's a bad time to retire, but that was kind of a bad time to retire. Let's just call it like it was. Mark Snyder officially was hired April 14th, 2005. That's late. I mean, that is a late hire. Usually by that point, you've already got 3 months or more into it, maybe 4 months. And he was just right immediately thrown at the wolves there. He had a 5-year contract to start as well. And of course, he was the former Ohio State defensive coordinator from 2001 to 2004. Had a lot of good success there with Jim Tressel. He played 1 season at Marshall in 1987, had a great year, actually set the single season interceptions record for Marshall. I don't know if it still stands or not, but he had 10 interceptions that year. So he was a great player for the Herd. He's from South Point, Ohio, so he's a local guy. He knows about, the area, the program. He gets it. We talked about that before. There was just a lot of weird kind of scenarios and situations going on with the Snyder era, especially to the start of it. And another couple of things to mention is the fact that they were moving that season. They had made the move from the MAC to the Conference USA. And at that point, Conference USA was very tough, very good league. It was a tough position to be in immediately, as well as the fact that you cannot ignore and you cannot overstate the fact that they had recruiting violations at that point. They were on probation. Started in December of 2001. It lasted 4 years. They lost a total of 15 scholarships over that time frame. So right off the bat, just go down the checklist. He was hired in April. That's a late hire. They were moving from the MAC to Conference USA. Very big step up in competition. He had less scholarships to work with. That's all immediately at the time he was hired. So at that point, you pretty much could see that it was going to be a rebuild or a tough situation. So before we get into these year-by-year results and things, talk about what you thought about the hiring of Mark Snyder, if you remember any of that. Just what do you think about that?
Well, quite frankly, I was pretty young in those days, but as you said, it was a very controversial thing with Bob Pruitt abruptly retiring. A lot of people like to, have the speculation of, well, Bob knew that, this isn't the MAC anymore. This is going to be the Conference USA.
Right.
Talent is going to be a whole lot better year by year than it was whenever it was the MAC. And so he'd rather have gone out as a winner instead of in disgrace as a loser. I don't know. I can't tell you one way or the other if that's true or not. But we do know that he did indeed retire and that he did indeed leave the program. And as you said, it definitely put Mark Snyder in a very difficult position just as late as the decision was made for him to depart from the program. You mentioned some things there about Mark. He's from the area, tri-state area there. He's a South Point pointer, played his high school days around there. And he was, like you said, played there in the late 80s, was a very, very good player, 124 tackles his senior year, honorable mention, All-American. First team Southern Conference, he led Marshall to the 1987 Division I AA National Championship game as well. So, he was a part of some really, really good program as far as his playing days is concerned. A son of Marshall, loved this place. And whenever he did get hired, I do know this. There was excitement around it because, he'd been a couple really good spots. I think back to his coaching career. He started here at Marshall in 1988 as a graduate assistant, then went down to UCF for a little bit as another graduate assistant, then the linebackers coach eventually. Spent some time really a long time with Jim Tressel at Youngstown State first from 1991 to 1996, where interestingly enough, they won one AA national championships and played in 4 straight national championship games. Of course, that one in which they lost was to, you can guess it, Marshall University. But that was pretty cool. Then he ended up going to Minnesota, was a defensive ends coach for a little while, and then made his way back with Jim Tressel at Ohio State from 2001 to 2004 as a linebackers coach, and then eventually the defensive coordinator. In that time span that he was at Ohio State, 40-11 record, 2002 national champion, Fiesta Bowl win, coached guys like A.J. Hawk, one of the best defensive players in college football history.
Yeah.
So by 2005, really Mark Snyder was viewed as a future star. He's one of the premier guys in coaching. He's got a long track record of proven success at really every level that he was at. And so, yes, it was at the end of, the overall coaching carousel by far, but still yet, that's a pretty good hire. All things considering, you get the defensive coordinator at Ohio State, you're doing pretty good.
Yeah.
And then just making him his playing career here at Marshall and all that different kind of stuff, that just added to it. So, fans, I'm sure were excited. I'm sure that it was a good time overall whenever the announcement was made. And I'm sure there was a lot of hope that was coming whenever he got announced as that next head coach. You mentioned it too, though. It was an impossible situation from the start. You are trying to replace Bob Pruitt. Right. Which is nearly impossible unless you go out and you win a national championship. I mean, he's the best football coach in all of Marshall history, bar none. There's nobody better. Nobody had the accolades and anything that he was able to have. And then you throw in the fact you're going to the Conference USA, rising competition. You're going to see some really, really legendary football players. Case Keenan comes to mind from Houston, and Chris Johnson at ECU, tons of guys. I mean, we could just sit here and we could talk about so many guys in this era that he was coaching that he had to go up against. So it was, and really this too, from our perspective as fans, we had an unrealistic expectation. We were expecting, we went from Bob Pruitt, who won everything, and we should just continue this, right? We're entitled almost to just winning football. And we learned real quickly that's not how the world works. And this would be the most difficult time to be a fan at Marshall. And we're still honestly feeling the effects of it today because of this span of time that Mark Snyder was the head guy and all of the decisions that were made and all the really failures that we saw. We did not get to that next level as a Boise State did. We definitely could have been America's sweetheart, and today we could still be one of the premier, if not the premier, group of 6 teams. However, because we mismanaged this entire situation, it just didn't pan out. Because you think about it, we had fantastic players during that time. We had a movie come out. I mean, just so much stuff was going on. It was a great time, but at the same time, it was a terrible time. Yeah. And it's really sad to look back and just see how everybody involved from the coaching failures, more specifically from the top in the athletic department, that their failures led to the fact that really it pushed the program back years and years and years, because you go from the most winningest team in the 90s to a fantastic start in the 2000s to this. It was definitely a reality check. It was a tough time overall.
It was. And, I don't actually think I remember vividly when he was hired, like immediately. I have memories of most of the other coaches. Well, I've got memories of Doc and Huff and Gibson when they were hired, like immediately, but I do not really remember the immediate hire of Mark Snyder, but I remember everything else about those years very, very well. Very vivid in my mind. I remember having the inaugural season in Conference USA shirt. I would always wear that, that year. And so I remember all that. And the fact is he was kind of put behind the 8 ball from the start. I mean, it was just unfortunate because he was really dealt a bad hand, in my opinion. And we talked about a lot of that, and it is what it is. It did not turn out the way we wanted it to. When you're talking about going from the MAC And, at that point, when Marshall was in the MAC from 97 to 04, the MAC basically had 2 or 3 teams that were like contenders every year. That was about it. Conference USA had about a half dozen teams that could compete for a championship. It was just a huge difference. And like you said, you're going from playing, Kent State and Buffalo to playing UCF and Houston. I mean, it's a huge difference. And not only that, but the fact that early on, he still had to deal with the scholarship reductions. He had to deal with just the fallback from that and like having to come back from that. And that was under Pruitt's regime. That wasn't Snyder. He didn't ask for any of that. So, as much as we love Bob Pruitt, as much great things as he did, he got him in trouble there for a little bit. And, it had a trickle down effect that affected Mark Snyder tremendously as a head coach and the whole program. And you're right. If we were on such a roll at that point, heading into the Conference USA era, we were on such a roll that if we had just been able to capitalize on that, like you said, a movie came out, a freaking Hollywood movie, feature film came out, and we had all this momentum going before we got to Conference USA. If we could have capitalized on that, no doubt in my mind, we'd be in a Power 4 league right now. No doubt in my mind, but it didn't work out. So it is what it is. But looking at the 2005 season to start with, his first season as the head coach, they go 4-7. That was their first losing regular season since 1983. So over 20 years since they had a losing season. And the only other season that they had that wasn't a winning season was the year before in 04 when they went 6-6. They had never had a losing season since 83. That's just kind of mind-boggling to me. But regardless, started out week 1. They beat William and Mary at home. That was kind of just a so-so performance, but they won. Game 2, though, big one. You have Kansas State coming to the Joan, biggest brand name team that had ever played at the Joan at that point. Had every opportunity in the book to beat that team. Lost 21-19 at the very end while they're in field goal range. Threw a pick, game over. I remember that game just so well. Even to this day, it's just ingrained in my memory. Being there, watching it, and then not only that, the fact that we could have kicked a field goal and won. We had about 2 or 3 turnovers inside the 10 or 5 yard line in that game. So we were the better team in that game. Lost. I think that if he wins that game, I think the entire era shifts in a different direction. I'm not saying they would have been like a MAC powerhouse but I'm saying that entire era would have shifted if he got that win, in my opinion. It was brutal loss. And to talk a little bit more about those games that year, we lost 3 straight games in the year. We were 4-4. So at that point, we were still in contention for bowl eligibility. Lost 3 straight. Had 3 losses by 5 points or fewer. Brutal losses. Really close, bad losses. Bernie Morris had a strong start at quarterback that year. He was really coming out of the gates hot, but he did battle injury a lot that year. He got injured in that Kansas State game, as a matter of fact. That was another thing. If Morris doesn't go down in that first half of that game, they probably win that game that way too. So he split time with Jimmy Skinner, and Jimmy Skinner was an admirable guy, but he just wasn't very special at quarterback. He was just very average. No offense. Bernie Morris had a lot more potential, but unfortunately he was hurt a lot. Ahmad Bradshaw had a nice year that year, 997 yards rushing, almost 1,000-yard season, and kind of surprising turn of events at the end of the season. After that season, you're talking about your first losing season in over 20 years. Mark Snyder was extended 5 years through the 2013 season. And I was like, I didn't even realize that until I did some research. I was like, man, that is bold. Extending a guy 5 years after you have a losing record. I mean, I know it was just 1 year, but man, I did not see that coming. But so yeah, that season was a season that should have been a lot better than it was. It had a lot of close losses. Just stuff that, we in the past, we win those games. If it was in the past, we would have won those close games. But unfortunately, we did not. Things just didn't go our way that year. To talk a little bit about that 2005 season, his debut season at the helm there.
Yeah, it's a season definitely with transition. I remember so vividly the Bernie Morris days. Man, I was such a fan of him.
Mm-hmm.
He was fun to watch. Very fast, had a good arm. But the dreaded turf toe, man, we heard it
Yeah.
every week. Is he going to play? Is it when he does play? Will he be able to run? Yada yada yada.
Yeah.
So I mean, it was definitely that was a whole process, and even in itself. Really, what did the season end is losing those two back-to-back losses there at the end against two teams that Marshall should never have lost to. Again, Tulane today is known to be a fantastic football program. Back in 2005, they not so. They were one of the bottom feeders of the entire Conference USA. And realistically, they won like 3 or 4 games every single season there for a while. I mean, they were not a good team. So losing at Tulane in the Superdome with probably 25 people, that was not a good look. And like you said, 7-10 was the final score. I mean, just a heartbreaker of the game right there. Brutal missed opportunity, and that led into the very next game, UAB. This was almost just a couple years away from UAB dismantling the entire football program. Okay, so that's where they were. They were very close with Tulane there at the bottom, competing for who is the worst in the entire conference. So if you were able to win those 2 games alone, you go 6-6 in your first season. You're in bowl eligibility. It's not a losing season per se, and Marshall fans are saying, "All right, this is a new era and different things like that." So it's tough. However, you did make it to the bowl game. We still got some hope. That's fine, but it didn't happen. Just could not put it together. Like you said, Ahmad Bradshaw was definitely the guy that emerged out of everybody there in the pack. Had a fantastic first breakout season with Marshall. And that would be a foreshadow of just everything he would be able to do later on. Just a legendary career that he was able to have. But Jimmy Skinner at your quarterback, again, he's a great guy. Still comes to Marshall sometimes. Now high school coach, I believe, in the state of Kentucky somewhere, if I'm not mistaken. I think that's I don't know exactly, but he's tough to watch. You know, he's slow, didn't have the greatest arm. Again, great guy, I'm sure. I don't know him, but I do know this, that missing out on a healthy Bernie Morris for that entire first year, man, oh man, it could have been so different if he would have been able to stay healthy, because he had every tangible thing you could need to really be a star at Marshall and one of the all-time greats. It just didn't work out. So first year definitely was a disappointment. However, it wasn't the end of the year or the world either at the end of the year because, again, this is a new head coach. This is a new conference. We are suffering through recruiting violations. There's lots of caveats that I think fans were able to get out of that season. And the fact, too, a lot of close losses. We're not getting blown out. They're close. So, there was obviously disappointment, but there was also hope in that disappointment heading into the next year of 2006.
Yeah, that's a good way to look at it because, like I said, I mean, they had 3 losses. Like I said, 3 losses by 5 points or fewer. If they win those 3 games, instead of 4-7, they're 7-4. And then, that was before they had started playing 12 games. They started playing 12 games the next year. But, I mean, if 7-4, I would have took that year 1 for sure. I would have taken anything. I mean, I would have taken 6-5. I don't care. That would have been fine. But unfortunately, we just did not. It just didn't quite work out that year. And that's going to be a reoccurring theme here the next few years as well. But that one especially, you want to set the tone early. You want to set it, and it just didn't get set the right way. A lot of close losses and a lot of just kind of issues and things. So 2005 was not a very good year. But then 2006, you come in expecting better. And you return, obviously, quite a few players. Ahmad Bradshaw had a monster year, which I'll talk more about that later. A lot of excitement heading into that 06 season. Just to start with, you got the We Are Marshall movie premiere. You got the We Are Marshall movie stuff going on that year with Matthew McConaughey when he came to town and all that. I mean, that was exciting stuff. Very exciting stuff. Unfortunately, the start to the year just doomed them right out of the gate. They had a horrid start to that year. 1-5 out of the gate in 06. Unfortunately, though, they did have a very difficult early season schedule as well. That was the first year that they played WVU in the Friends of Coal Bowl sham of a series. That was the first game of that. Lost that one, of course. Lost to Kansas State on the road, and then lost to Tennessee on the road. So those are 3 very, very tough games to start with. Not all consecutively, but those are really tough games to start. in your first 6. So then after that, and then also during that 1-5 start, they had a 1-point loss to UCF at home. That was the game that was on national TV, a Wednesday night, Tuesday night, whatever night it was, when McConaughey and McGee and all those guys came to town for the movie premiere. That was that game. And lost on a last-second field goal, had every opportunity in the world to win that game, lost by 1 point. That's, again, just more of a trend, just losing games they shouldn't be losing. But then after that, they did start playing better. They had 3 straight wins after that, one of which I remember very well being against UTEP when Ahmad Bradshaw had about a 5-touchdown rushing performance against them. Great win there. So at that point, they were in contention for bowl eligibility. They had beaten, I don't remember who else they beat after that, but they were 5-6 at one point in that season. They had to win the last game of the year at Southern Miss to become bowl eligible. Got absolutely smoked. 42-7 or whatever it was, ended up 5-7. They finished 1-2 to the last 3 games. Well, they needed to win 2 of them. So unfortunately, another losing season, although they did have some individual performances that really stood out that year. Albert McClellan, Conference USA Defensive Player of the Year, monster year, huge year for him. And then Ahmad Bradshaw rushed for 1,523 yards and 19 touchdowns, monster. And unfortunately, Bradshaw would leave the next season before the next season, so he did not come back for his senior year. He went to the NFL, got drafted, had a great NFL career, but would have liked to have seen him come back for another year. And again, it was more of the same at the quarterback position, switching back and forth between Morris and Skinner, health issues here and there. That was just, if you don't have a quarterback that you can solidly lean on and trust and a solidly healthy guy, you're just going to struggle. And unfortunately, that was the case. Imagine how much better Bradshaw would have been if he had had a complimentary passing game that year. So, more of the same from 05 to 06, just a lot of close losses, some brutal stuff. Some nice individual performances, really good start for a lot of these players. You knew Albert McClellan had a big future. He literally won Defensive Player of the Year that year. So talk a little bit about that 06 season.
Yeah, this was an elevated season whenever we talk about performance on the field. I think 2005, for the majority of the games, it was more or less scraping by. This year, we saw guys kind of break out. Albert McClellan is going to be in the NFL. Ahmad Bradshaw was going to be in the NFL. You got guys like Cody Slate too around this time period who eventually would be in the NFL as far as on a roster, didn't make it fully, and all that. Yeah. But you had some really, really solid teams or players on the team. With that being said, I would dare say that's probably in contention with one of the most toughest non-conference schedules ever in Marshall history. Number 5, West Virginia. Kansas State on the road, and then number 15, Tennessee on the road too. That is a tough slate of games. Yeah. And so that's very, very difficult. I remember that UCF game, and that was a very exciting day there at Marshall with Matthew McConaughey and all of that big crowd, all that good stuff. But man, what a heartbreaker game. That's one of the ones you look back on and say, well, man, I wish it could be different. Wish things would have been able to swing a different way. But really, looking at all of these wins and losses here, I will say that the offense did perform a whole lot better than what they did the first year, and that's thanks in part a lot to Ahmad Bradshaw. Didn't have a ton of help in the passing game, but man, they could run the ball. But overall, just with the offense improving, with the team showing fight in them, this is the season that I think a lot of people looked at that contract extension with Mark Snyder and said, you know what, this is probably a good thing because we've got talent, we've got guys on the roster that are going to make a difference. It's just a matter of putting it all together. And that 2007 year, the expectation was, all right, this is it. You know what I mean? We saw year 1 with the transition. We saw promise in 2006 with year 2. So year 3, everything's going to just click. It'll all make sense. It'll be put together. It'll be great. And things didn't really happen that way in 2007.
No, it definitely did not. And, it just, I don't know. I don't know what it was. 2005 and 6, both of those years, quite frankly, I think they should have been in bowl games both of those years. I think they were good enough to be, just didn't work out. I mean, if you win, just looking at 06 again, if you just win that UCF game, you're 6-6 right there. So at that point, you're probably bowling. If you had a little lesser of a non-conference schedule, you're definitely bowling that year. And then, so that was unfortunate. And they did return a lot of these guys, like you were talking about. McClellan was going on deck for a huge year in 07. But that's the first sign of what that year was going to be like. Because in the preseason, before the season starts, he goes down with an injury. I think it was ACL. He's gone whole year. So at that point, you knew, okay, this isn't our year. When your defensive player of the year is injured preseason, you knew you were toast at that point. And like that was the sign, that was a sign of things to come. And unfortunately, we already know how that year went. Did not do anything for us whatsoever. 3-9. So that's 3 straight years of losing seasons. Just unprecedented at Marshall at that point. Unprecedented basically since the 60s or 70s. I mean, or maybe 70s or early 80s. It's unprecedented to have 3 straight losing seasons at Marshall. And we just did not play well for the most of that season. I mean, you got an 0-7 start, okay? 0-7 with a loss at home to New Hampshire. I was there. I don't know what they were doing. It was ugly. And then they had, of course, and the trend continued. They had some close losses as well. Very close loss to Memphis, very close loss to Tulsa, and then they lost to Southern Miss by single digits. So those are 3 losses right there in the first 7 that a couple of them could have been wins. That could have changed things. It just didn't click. Nothing was clicking at that point. But they did start to play better at the end of the season. They won 3 out of their last 5. And one of those games being they beat East Carolina 26-7. And that was when East Carolina controlled its own destiny in the Conference USA East Division, played really well in that game. Chris Johnson and all those guys at East Carolina, Dwayne Harris, I think, was there at that point. Great team. Marshall really plays well and beats them. They lost in total. They lost 4 games by 9 points or fewer. Again, that's just a lot of close losses. I mean, I'm not saying that they weren't a good team. They were 3-9, but they could have been a better team than what they ended up being. And Bernie Morris, thankfully, was healthy that year. He had his best season at Marshall to date. And as a senior in 07, he played really well. Unfortunately, not enough other things clicked. And it just was a struggle. Like I said, you started out with your defensive player of the year out the whole year before even playing in the first game. It was a rough start. It was a very rough start. And if you also remember that year, they played West Virginia really tough that year. Through 3 quarters. They played them really tough at home. West Virginia was ranked number 3 at that time. They had Slayton and White, and they were really, really rolling. And we were beating them at halftime, and we were only down 4 heading into the fourth quarter. We just ran out of gas. We just flat out ran out of gas, could not compete in that fourth quarter. But that team was not – I truly believe that team was not as bad as their record said. 3-9 is not good at all. 3-9 is brutal. But I think that team really should have been better than what they ended up being because they started playing well at the end of the year. You could see like the potential that they had if they played well. So talk a little bit about that 07 season. Boy, it was a doozy.
Well, whenever you think about 2007, you think instantly about the New Hampshire loss. I would say that's probably the worst loss in all of Marshall football history.
It's up there for sure.
I can't off the top of my head think of one that's more embarrassing. Losing to an FCS school at home, that was a terrible, terrible, terrible loss. And like you said, I really don't know what the problem was because looking at the roster, man, you had some solid guys. You had Bertie Morris. Again, he was damaged goods at this point. He was healthy the entire season. They may have had the best season, but. Yeah, he definitely was not the same guy that came in as a freshman at Marshall just because of all of the injuries and playing half the time. And he had a lot of setbacks. And one of the greatest what ifs in Marshall history is what if Bernie Morris would have been able to stay healthy throughout his entire career. Losing to Miami, Ohio in overtime, man, a heartbreaking loss. That's one win they should have had. New Hampshire, that's another win they should have had. I tell you what, one of the ugliest losses in all of the Snyder tenure too was not just New Hampshire, but it was at home against UAB that same season, 56-14 loss. I mean, again, I want to reiterate, in a couple of seasons, UAB would cease to be a football program, like just 2 or 3 more seasons. And that's one of the most humiliating losses that we've ever seen. Then a couple at Tulsa as well, a 59-7 loss, UTEP 40-3 loss. So, I mean, this goes now from, all right, we're losing close ones, we're getting blown out. I mean, we're just getting rocked. And this was rock bottom for the tenure of Mark Snyder. You know, this was the worst year I think that he had, and this was definitely a season that a lot of players would and fans and everybody would like to be able to forget. And I would dare say the 2007 season was the very year that really kind of set up Marshall for where they would be at for the next decade or so. Attendance down way, like just unbelievably down. And I can't really fault anybody. The team stunk. I mean, hey, who's going to go out there and watch them? Now that we're up on the big boy level, playing these big boy teams, having, great non-conference schedules and bringing in fantastic football programs, and this is the results, we're just not going to watch the product anymore. And so, I mean, it was a total collapse everywhere. And again, this is not just one man's fault. You can't put this on Mark Snyder, all of it. He definitely was a contributing factor, but I guarantee you he didn't go out there every single Saturday hoping to lose. I mean, he was trying his best. He was giving it all that he had. His staff was giving it all they had. But this is just a lot of different factors coming together to make this season one of the worst in all of Marshall football history. And the really tragic part of it all is that it just wouldn't ever get much better than this. Again, this was rock bottom, and that's bad. And the next season wasn't a whole lot better. So it was tough. It was a tough time to be a Marshall fan in these years because it just wasn't what we were used to at all. Like you said, the first losing season was Snyder's first year there in 2005, and that was the first losing season in like 20 years. It was a difficult thing. You had fans literally in the stands that never saw Marshall have a losing season.
Right.
Think about it. That's crazy. So this year I think was the death knell of Mark Snyder. Fans were gone. People lost interest, and in spite of them putting out some good guys, and I mean they had some talented players, and they would go to the NFL and be all conference and all that good stuff. You just lost fan support, and there was no coming back from that. I think a lot of people just tuned out the 2 next seasons of Marshall football because they were sick and tired of Mark Snyder. Because, like we said at the start, you go from major winner Bob Pruitt, like national champion FCS level, MAC champion almost every single season, Heisman Trophy candidates, all of that to this, and you just lost everybody. And so that would set back the program so much that whenever conference realignment did come around, Marshall wasn't even in the conversation. And I can't blame anybody. I mean, putting the product out that we put out, we didn't deserve to go to what would the quote-unquote Big East that became the American Conference. And really, I think that this season in 2007 was that death knell of no longer having the fan support, no longer becoming a national media darling. And it really set up for a very, very, very tough decade of Marshall football, even with what we talked about the Doc Holliday seasons and how he brought them back and different things. Even with that, because we were still in that awful Conference USA, fans weren't coming. There was no excitement. So it was a very tough season that I think had a lot of implications for years and years to come.
Big missed opportunities all across the board for sure. I mean, at that point, 05 and 06, I feel like fans were kind of like, okay, this sucks, but like we'll see how it plays out. But then after going 3-9 and 07, I feel like that was when everybody jumped off the bandwagon for Snyder. And to top that off, I know everybody jumped off the bandwagon after 08 because that's what we're getting ready to talk about. In 08, on paper, if you just look at the record, you're thinking, okay, that team was terrible. Au contraire, that team was way better than that. Way, way better than that. I still think about this year pretty frequently, to be honest, that despite the fact that they went 4-8, I think that team very well, if they had a few things go their way, a few plays, we're talking a few plays, they could have potentially won the East Division that year. And as crazy as that sounds, I'm going to break that down closer because it doesn't matter because they lost the game, so it's all null and void. But I'm saying that team should have been the team that did a lot more than they did. So just looking at it like this, you come out of the gate, you're 3-1. You're playing really well. You're 3-1. You just beat Southern Miss on the road, who we had never beaten on the road. I don't think we had beaten them, period, at that point. Played them on the road, played them well. We had beaten Memphis. We had beaten Illinois State. So we were 3-1. Only loss was to Wisconsin. And then after that, I don't know what it was, but we started playing. I know we had a couple tough non-conference games after that. Lost at home to Cincinnati. Lost on the road to WVU. And, at one point we were 4-4. Okay, we were 4-4. And 3-1 in the Conference USA. We had just beaten Houston. That was the game we always talk about. Absolutely throttled Houston, 37-23. Wasn't even that close. That was Case Keenum and Kevin Sumlin and Dana Holgerson. That was their Houston team. We beat them bad on a Tuesday night game at the Joan. So at that point, we're sitting there with the green helmets, right? That was what those games were. So we're sitting there at 4-4. That's not lighting the world on fire, but 3-1 in the league. We were in first place in the East Division with 4 games to go. And then the next game after that, we go on the road at East Carolina, who ended up winning the East Division. We lose to them by 3 points in overtime. 3 points in overtime to East Carolina. And then unfortunately we lost every game after that. And it was just a complete collapse. And then to Tulsa in the last game of the year. Now, granted, we were already out of contention for everything. We were at that point 4-7, but we go at home and play Tulsa, who wins the West Division. We lose to them by 3. So we literally lose to the East and West Division representatives by a total of 6 points and 1 overtime. You cannot tell me that team was not better than they were. Or you can't tell me that team shouldn't have been better than they were. That's what I mean to say. So you're talking, they were a few plays away from being a 7+ win team instead of a 4-win team. And it was just very unfortunate. And that team was, I truly believe in my heart of hearts, that team was better than what they ended up being. That was the year that also we ended up bringing in a new quarterback, Mark Can. If you remember Mark Can, he was very up and down, to say the least, as a freshman that year, but he had his moments. He wasn't all bad. Brian Anderson ended up emerging late in that season as quarterback. He played in that last game against Tulsa where we almost beat them. And then Brian Anderson, that would become his team after that. Darius Marshall comes on strong that year. He had a nice freshman year in 2007, but he really came on strong in 2008. So, looking at it at a broad look of it, we had losses by 2 points, 3 points, and 3 points, all in conference play. I mean, that's just absolutely gut-wrenching bad. Horrible, painful losses. So if we win those 3 games, we end up 7-5, and we would have only had, I think we would have only had 1 or 2 losses maybe 2 losses in conference. So we would have had a tiebreaker over East Carolina. I mean, you don't realize how close, like what a game of inches that football really is, because that team was not good on paper. The record says they weren't good. They didn't win enough games, but man, they weren't far. So talk about that 2008 season, because that one still sticks with me.
Yeah, you said it. Again, this is a team that had a tremendous amount of talent, but just could not seem to put it together. I will say this, you mentioned Houston game right there. That is what I would declare as one of the most underrated upsets in Marshall history.
Yeah.
We on paper had no chance. I mean, Case Keenum's literally breaking every single passing record in NCAA history. This was like the dream team. This was honestly the media darling team of the entire country, because I don't remember what their final record was, but I do believe that were they undefeated at the time whenever we played them?
I don't think they were, but they ended up winning like 8 or 9 games, I think.
Okay, yeah. So they were in the driver's seat as far as all of that national attention, different things.
Yeah.
it just, again, just a lot of just questionable things that took place. I can't put my finger on it because it doesn't make sense to me. How
Yeah.
do you lose to Rice that bad, 35-10? Um, how do you lose again to UAB, another just questionable loss? Like, why in the world? 23-21 of just, again, frustrating loss after frustrating loss. It doesn't make sense to me altogether, but it is what it is. What it is, and we kept on rolling. Again, you kept on going every single season. Man, next year's the year they're going to put it together, and they just never did. And I wish I could put my finger on exactly why that is the case. I wish I could tell you what it was, but I have no clue. I really don't know how things got the way that they did.
Yeah. I mean, at this point, I feel like everybody had jumped off the bandwagon. I felt like at this point, everybody was like, get this guy out of here. I mean, there was really no other. I mean, he had one more year, and we're going to get ready to talk about it. But at this point, everybody was done. I mean, you're talking 4-7, 5-7, 3-9, and 4-8 consecutively. That just is not Marshall football. And they just got in their way too much. They beat themselves way too much. Too many self-inflicting losses. A lot of bad losses as well. Not just, I mean, they had some blowout stinkers in there, through those years, but man, they lost a lot of close games. And it's just, I don't know why they couldn't put it together. I know that, that's really your job as the coach to get a team over the hump. And he couldn't do it. I mean, all those 4 years, well, maybe not 07, but most of those first 4 years, they could have been playing in bowl games. Every single one of them should have been. I mean, they just didn't. They just missed out. So it wasn't, I don't think it was a lack of talent. They had a lot of good players. I think the biggest issue to me was probably the depth. I feel like they didn't necessarily have a lot of guys like MB. Like the starters were pretty good. A lot of them are really good. But I feel like once you got to that second and third level, that's where the drop-off started. And maybe that had to do with the recruiting violations early on. Maybe that had to do with just the stigma around the program at that point. Maybe people weren't as willing to go there. I don't know. But there was definitely an issue there. And it reared its ugly head 4 times in a row, 4 years in a row. So at this point, everybody's done with him. I mean, they just are. But in 2009, it was, I mean, you want to talk about hot seat and make or break. That was it right there. 2009 was it. It was literally you win this year or we have to move on. I mean, there was the program, if they had kept him past that year, the program probably would, I don't even want to know where it would have went. It would not have been good. But looking at the 2009 season, started well. Again, 3-1 start, sitting there nice. They were 5-3 after 8 games, 5-3 and 3-1 in the league. Again, right in contention for East Division Championship with 4 games to go. They had some close losses as well. I know I've heard that before. They lost to East Carolina by 4 at home, a very good East Carolina team. They had a loss to WVU and Virginia Tech, which that you can expect that. Played WVU well for 2 quarters, 3 quarters, had a lead on them at halftime up there in Morgantown, just lost in the 4th quarter. But then, unfortunately, after a 5-3 start, they lost 3 of their final 4 games. 1-point loss at UCF, where 1-point loss at UCF where they don't defend a receiver standing there on the goal line. They come out of a timeout. I can see it. I can see it right now in my head. They don't even put a defender on a receiver standing there at the goal line wide open. And with like a few seconds to go, and UCF beats us by 1 when we were up by 13 in the second half. Brutal. 7-point home loss to Seven-point home loss to Southern Miss. A very, very winnable game because I was at that game. I was at pretty much all these home games mostly. Lost that one. They should not have lost that one. But then thankfully they did beat SMU at home in week 11, 34-31. That was the game that finally clinched at least bowl eligibility for the first time under Mark Snyder. They were 6-5 at that point. Played a really good SMU team. That was a very good team. They had a lot of NFL talent on that team. Emmanuel Sanders, Zach Line, Cole Beasley, all those guys on that SMU team. Very, very good team. June Jones was the head coach. Marshall beats them really well, plays them really well and beats them. So you're thinking, okay, this is good. week 12, we're going to go and beat UTEP and we're going to be 7-5. Didn't work exactly that way. You go to UTEP and get absolutely smoked like a cheap cigar. 52-21 loss to UTEP. Horrendous loss. And then at that point, he was done. It was, I think it might have been the next day that they said that he is resigning, quote unquote, which that means get out of town, whether we have to fire you or not. Bye. So he resigned, but they did finish 6-6, and they did get to a bowl game that year for the first time since 2004. Rick Minter was the interim head coach at that point. He was the defensive coordinator at the time. He coaches them in the Little Caesars Bowl against Ohio. They beat them 21-17. They finished above 500 for the first time since 2003. So it had been a while. And, Snyder did get them to a position where they were in a bowl game and where they had a lot of good players that year. They had, Cody Slate had a good big year. Darius Marshall had a big year. Aaron Dobson was a freshman. He had a big year that year. Vinnie Curry, Mario Harvey, CJ Spillman. Well, I don't know. Spillman was gone a year before, but you're talking big time players. And he had a lot of talent. And it's just, unfortunately, again, too many close losses. They finished 6-6, 7-6, but 6-6 in the regular season. They could have been a 9-win team. They could have been 9-3 regular season if they had won a couple of those close games. So more of the same. They did better than what they had been doing, and they ultimately did play in a bowl game and won and had a winning season, but it still should have been more than that, in my opinion. A lot of close losses, a lot of tough results. So talk a little bit about that 2009 season. That was Snyder's last season. And then, of course, right before the Little Caesars Bowl, Doc Holliday is officially hired, and then we move into a different direction that saved the program. But talk about that 2009 season.
Yeah, I think Marshall was pretty much dead set against really getting rid of Snyder at the start of the season. I think the way that the season prior ended, the mentality everywhere was it doesn't really matter what happens. He could even maybe win out, although we don't expect that. We don't want him here anymore because fans were completely fed up and different things. So it was a challenging season no matter what. And it just boggles the mind whenever you just mentioned all of those guys on that team. These are legendary guys. These are guys that are household names. Doug Legursky is another guy that we don't talk nearly as much about. But, he was a starting center for the Pittsburgh Steelers there for a while. Mm-hmm. So, just great player after great player after great player was on this team. And the best that we could muster up is a 6-6 season. It's just unbelievable. The greatest thing that plagued Mark Snyder, I think, throughout his entire tenure here was he didn't get the quarterback position completely right. No. And like we said, Bernie Morris had everything that you could ever want. However, he just couldn't put it all together as far as staying healthy and different things. And he didn't have enough depth to make a lasting impact. And so whenever we think about Mark Snyder, we think about legendary players, except for that one position that matters the most, and that is the quarterback position. So I think that was his ultimate undoing. I believe that was the main reason as to why he could not get things ever past, the first gear of, all right, maybe we're going to put it all together. So it didn't really matter what was going to happen this year, but what happened this year was more of the same. More tough losses, winnable games that just didn't get won. So it was time. I hate that it ended this way because I really like Mark Snyder. He is honestly one of my favorite people that have ever coached here at Marshall. He just couldn't put it all together. And it's a tragic tale because, if anybody would have ever desired to be a winner here, it would have been him. Like, former player, made a huge impact, was on a national championship runner-up team. Here at Marshall, coached here a couple of seasons as well as he was making, his way up the coaching ladder there. Again, I don't understand it. I don't get it. I don't know why he couldn't put it all together. He had multiple seasons, of course, as we know, to kind of figure things out, but he just could not get it. And what is amazing to me, though, is that the basic foundation for success in the future was found in the team that Mark Snyder had built throughout his 5 seasons here. Yeah. He came in a tough spot. a lot more difficult competition. Players were not as good as what we saw with Randy Moss, Chad Pennington, Byron Leftwich, even Stan Hill before his injury. So he came in with that very, very tough position, and it took him forever, and it took him too long. And Marshall was willing to say, all right, we're pulling the cord here. We're getting rid of him. I think a lot of the times we think of him as a scapegoat. We say that Mark Snyder was the one that destroyed Marshall football, but context really matters whenever you talk about his tenure. With all of these things that we spoke about, massive expectations, the roster holes from the scholarship issues, the transition chaos of just coming in late, and all those things, he was going uphill from the very first day that he was here. And really, he was 1 or 2 years away. And I know that sounds crazy because you have 5 seasons. You should be able to figure it out by then.
Right.
But realistically, 1 or 2 seasons away from finding your quarterback, from putting all these pieces together and bringing Marshall back. And he wasn't the guy that was able to do that. But we already talked about him here on the podcast before. Doc Holliday was the beneficiary of that. He entered into a program that had slowly been rebuilt and had a foundation that was just fantastic. And Doc was able to build on it. And then also with the conference realignment and things, I mean, he was just in prime position to be very successful here, and he did. But whenever I think back on Mark Snyder, man, it was a tough time. It was a time that didn't make much sense. But even looking after his time at Marshall, this is just what baffles me even still. He went on to just still have a fantastic coaching career.
Yeah.
2012 to 2014, defensive coordinator at Texas A&M, coached guys like Myles Garrett. I mean, he was his coach. Michigan State from 2015 to 2017, Florida State, and then pro football with the Houston Gamblers and Orlando Guardians. And it's just amazing to me that the only stop in his entire coaching career, it was his most important stop here at Marshall with being the head coach, but he just couldn't make it work. Everywhere else he's been able to make it work except for here. And I just don't understand it. It is such a strange just study on a coach's tenure is Mark Snyder, because it makes no sense.
No. And, I think I kind of started with this talking about that he was dealt a bad hand, and I firmly believe he was dealt a bad hand. I think he was set up to fail, quite frankly. And I know that sounds kind of crazy coming off of an era where you are the most successful 9-year period in Marshall football history coming off of that, but he was set up to fail. All those things were going against him day one: recruiting violations, scholarship reductions, step up in competition, hired late, couldn't even get a full recruiting class in there for him, immediately. Like, all those things were set up for him to fail. And yes, ultimately he's the head coach. He's the one that you get paid, you get hired to win football games. Like, that's what you're there to do. You're there to get a team over the hump. You're there to make things right and win football games. He did not win enough football games. But I also think that brutally honestly, if you had put I would say the majority of other coaches that whoever Marshall would have hired after Pruitt, whoever it would have been, if you had put a coach in that exact same situation, I don't think he would have done a whole lot better, personally. Now, it might have been a little bit better because, they had maybe a coach that's a little bit tougher, or I don't know about tougher, but maybe if there's a coach that's better at getting a team to win close games and like their mindsets and things, maybe they win a few more of those close games. I don't know. But he had really good players, had some really good talent. I just don't necessarily think there was enough of them, like depth wise. I think that was an issue. Like you said, could not figure out the quarterback situation. He basically had 1 year of above average quarterback play, and that was 2007 with Morris when they were bad. So it really didn't even matter because the rest of the team wasn't up to par. So it was just a lot of weird things. He was set up to fail, no doubt in my mind. And, it's ultimately up to him to get him out of that situation, and he didn't. So he had to, they had to move on. There was no other alternative. But it's a very strange case for sure. But looking at it a little overall over the 5 years, well, basically 5 full years, he ended up with a 22-37 overall record. I mean, that's just one of the lowest in program history for sure. 17-23 in conference. Not really good at all. Never had an above 500 regular season. Only had one regular season where he was 500. Every other one was below 500. Obviously he doesn't get credit for coaching that Little Caesars Bowl. That was Rick Minter. Had some really standout players. We talked about them. I mean, Albert McClellan was the 06 Defensive Player of the Year in Conference USA. Ahmad Bradshaw was drafted in the 7th round in 2007. He ended up leading. He ended up having a really good career for the Giants and the Colts and whoever, all those guys. I mean, he was leading rusher in 2 Super Bowls for the Giants. Really good career. He had really strong undrafted free agents that ended up going on to big things. McClellan, C.J. Spillman, and then a lot of guys got drafted under Doc Holliday that he recruited. Vinnie Curry, guys like that. Aaron Dobson. Those were Mark Snyder recruits that ended up really developing under Holliday, and they got drafted under Holliday. But Snyder got them there in the first place. Program, at the time of his hiring, the program was on decline. And I think that's obvious. You just go back to the last couple years before that, 03, they go 8-4. It's not a bad year at all, but that was not what Marshall had been used to. They had been used to always playing for MAC championships. Didn't do it that year. Matter of fact, the MAC champion Miami absolutely throttled Marshall that year. Ben Roethlisberger. Then the next year, they go 6-6, lose a bowl game to Cincinnati. Marshall again that year had a lot of close losses. I remember that year. We were right in position to win the MAC East. Lost to Akron at the very end of the year. On the road, had a big lead, blew the lead. I mean, so Pruitt, as great as he was those last couple years, they were mortal again. They had been pretty much immortal for a number of years there in the MAC, and that was the program that Snyder inherited. He was a late hire. He had a very little time to prepare and get his bearings about him. The probation was still in play early on, scholarship reduction. I know it's only 5 or 4 per whatever, however many, a handful per year, but that goes a long way. And he had to deal with that early on. Conference USA, again, big step up from the MAC. It just was. There was some very questionable coaching decisions. Like I always go back to that Kansas State game in his first year. I know that it was an audible situation where Jimmy Skinner audibled out of the play they were going to run, where he threw the interception at the end when they were already in field goal range, down 2. That shouldn't happen. You have to get all that cleared. You have to get all your ducks in a row there. You got to cross all your T's and dot your I's there. You cannot have that big of a chaotic finish. So that's a coaching decision. It just things just did not click. Too many close losses, depth issue, consistent quarterback play issues. I mean, those are things that just will make or break you. And they broke Mark Snyder at Marshall. And he did a lot of good things, like everywhere else. That he, like you said, he had been a very successful assistant coach for many, many years before and after. But unfortunately, that's what kept him. Well, he just recently did get hired as the new head coach. I don't remember exactly. It's somewhere in Kentucky. But so that's awesome. I mean, hopefully he does really good, but that kept him from really being able to advance up the ladder in college football, FBS college football. So it's unfortunate. We wanted more. He wanted more. Of course he did. But things were not lined up for him. He did not capitalize on the opportunities that he had. It just didn't work out. So sometimes it happens, sometimes it doesn't. And unfortunately, it happened at a bad time for Marshall because they were in a point where they really could have taken another bigger step, and it just didn't work out. But with that being said, I guess we have to kind of close it out with giving a grade for the Mark Snyder era from top to bottom. We got to talk about a grade. So what do you got for that?
It's a tough one because on paper, everything points to you can't give it more than a D. However, when you put it all into perspective, I think a really great question that everyone has to ask whenever you think about Mark Snyder is this: what would have happened to Marshall without Mark Snyder? Well, without Mark Snyder, number one, you would have never seen all of the NFL talent that came through here. Um, we just recently saw a great influx of NFL talent once again. Really, to my knowledge, we saw, of course, back in the heyday of Marshall, there was Randy Moss and Chad Pennington and Byron Leftwich. But really, after that, those were the main guys, and everybody else on the roster was just kind of there. They didn't make it to the NFL. This period of football just kind of blows the mind, is actually the most successful as far as making players in Marshall history until Charles Huff came to town. So, you don't have that NFL talent that comes through because you won't have as good of a recruiter as Mark Snyder. Without Mark Snyder, Doc Holliday doesn't win as early as he does because he doesn't have the talent on the team. Mark Snyder literally built the teams that Doc Holliday would then take and make winning football once again. And without Snyder, also, it may have been even more painful because if you think about it, if it wasn't for the great recruiting, if it wasn't for the talent that came in, there was somebody that was maybe just a quote unquote good coach, but not a good recruiter who didn't have the talent. We could have had a defeated season. We could have had 1 or 2 win seasons. I mean, that could have been the reality. So I think a lot of people paint him as a villain in Marshall history, but in all reality, he's not a villain. He's a bridge, just put into a very, very difficult position that not a lot of guys would have ever had success in. So that being said, I'm going to give him a C- because, like I said, when you put all of it into perspective, he wasn't as bad as what people made him out to be, with all of the disadvantages, with all the problems and issues. Yes, he contributed. Yes, he wasn't perfect. Yes, he had a lot of problems. But with all things considering that, I'm giving him a C- because I think that we should really remember him a little bit more fondly than what we do. Because, I mean, hey, he tried to do things the right way, number one. And number two, he gave all that he had for Marshall. So I know that doesn't really matter, doesn't mean a whole lot, because wins and losses is what really people care about the most. But what we just saw a second ago with Charles Huff leaving our program, it's night and day difference. Yeah. Mark Snyder left a program that was destined for success. Charles Huff left a program that was destined to fail. So for that reason, I wish that things would have turned out better for Mark. I wish that he would have been a winner. He'd still been coaching here, maybe even right now. It just wasn't the case. So C-. I know that might be a little bit confrontational for others, but that's what I'm going to give them.
Yeah, stars just didn't align. I mean, it's kind of as simple as that. The stars just did not align. I think another aspect that we didn't really talk about was and it's crazy as it sounds, I think he left the program in a slightly better position for Doc Holliday than even Bob Pruitt left for him. Or it's probably substantially better. I mean, not that they were rolling or anything. They had just had one decent year finally, but like the cupboard was not bare at that point. And whenever Snyder took over, a lot of those really good Pruitt players were gone, and a lot of those guys. And we had, like I said, the scholarship reduction. So it was kind of bare bones there early on. I mean, they had some pretty good players come back, and they had some young guys that started emerging, but in my opinion, he definitely Snyder inherited a worse situation than even Doc Holliday did. And that's Doc Holliday taking over a program that had won 23 games in the last 5 years. So that shows how bad it was early on for Snyder. And, it's unfortunate. It's just the way that worked out. But my grade, and I've been kind of pondering this on and off a little bit. I do like your reasoning and your rationale behind the C-. I really do like that. It makes a lot of sense. And I almost went there, but I still just gave it a D. I don't know. The on-field results just weren't there. It could have been different if situations were better, if he had not been dealt such a bad hand, if he had not been, I mean, quite frankly, his administration at that point wasn't very good either. I mean, that admin back then at that point didn't really have a clue, quite frankly. And that was one thing Doc never had to worry about. He had a solid administration and solid leadership. Charles Huff, you could argue either way, but it was more solid than Snyder's. And then right now, Tony Gibson's got a great leadership. So, he was just so many things were stacked against this man. And I'm not trying to make excuses. I did not feel sorry for him one iota back in the day. Didn't care. I wanted him out of there. But now that's been 15 plus years since it's happened, well, more than 15 years now, I can see things a little better, a little clearer. And he definitely was not set up to succeed at all. And that goes back to Pruitt not setting him up for success in his part. That goes back to the administration at the time, not setting him up for success. And, like I said, it's ultimately up to him to get a team to win. That's obviously what he's there to do. So that just by itself, that's why I gave it a D. But he did leave the program with enough talent to where Doc Holliday could take over, start bringing in his own guys, and start turning the thing around. And, it's just disappointing to have to talk about it like that because, we've not had an era like that. I mean, since who knows when, long time. And it's unfortunate, but it was reality and it helped us get to where we are now. So, he did all he could do. He's a Marshall guy. He wanted to be here. He cared. He tried to do what he could do, all he could do. It just didn't work out. And on another side note too, how in the world can an administration that has a Hollywood feature film coming to your school, how could you not capitalize on that? That just blows my mind. I mean, I don't know how they dropped the ball there. I really don't know how they dropped that ball. But
yeah, I always go back to that portion of time. Again, it was the death knell for Marshall athletics in general because you had so much momentum. And yeah, the team was mortal again. I like the way that you put that. The last year of Bob Pruitt wasn't the greatest. So it was definitely on a downward spiral. But with that being said, that doesn't mean that you can lose what you had.
right.
They're on national TV all the time. There's been some moments where Boise State has had some down seasons, but guess what? They're still national darling. There's been some down season for Appalachian State, but guess what? They're still national darling right now. And Marshall had all of it. I mean, it was right there in the hand. They had game day come and Lee Corso was in town and different things, announced one of the games. And so you had everything that you needed for success, but you just could not capitalize on it in the administration portion of things. And that is just the most frustrating part of it all because, I mean, it was set up on a silver platter. We could be still a national darling, but we're not. We are, again, for lack of a better term, in a lot of people's minds, a forgettable team that a lot of people don't give a lot of respect. Oh, yeah, Randy Moss did go there. Oh, yeah, Chad Pennington did go there. And it's more of an afterthought than the main thought. So it's a shame. I hate that things turned out the way that it did. But it is what it is. I like what you said, too, about our administration right now. We are on the up and up. It's just a crying shame that we didn't have them in that year of the year span of 2005 to 2012-ish. If we had the leadership that we have right now, I'm telling you, Marshall University in 2026 would be far beyond what we are at this present moment. It would be night and day difference.
By far. Yeah. And, you look at a lot of those teams that we talked about from the Conference USA era, SMU, ACC, UCF, Big 12, Cincinnati. Well, no, they weren't in the Conference. They were at one point in Conference USA.
A lot of these playoff team.
Tulane playoff team. I mean, you're talking
Houston,
a lot
Big
of these.
12.
Right. Houston, Big 12. A lot of these programs that were our peers, they went on to bigger and better things and big, Power 4 type leagues. And that's because they were able to take advantage of their opportunities. We didn't. Everything involved with us right at that point just dropped the ball. They just dropped the ball. And it's not all Mark Snyder at all. I think I truly believe even if Bob Pruitt had stayed the head coach, I don't think that he has anywhere near the success that he had in the MAC. No question about it. And that's not to take away from Bob Pruitt, greatest coach we've ever had. But based on how things were trending at that point, you knew it was going to be you knew it was going to be a struggle. That you cannot ignore something that is staring you right in the face. All those things going against Mark Snyder, all those issues, you knew it was going to be a tough struggle. And even despite the struggle and all the uphill battles that he had to climb, he still had them not as far away from success as you think. If you look at the record, you see 22-37, you're thinking, oh my gosh, doormat, horrible. Yeah, and on paper they were, but they were not as far away as people think. They were much closer than people think. Just put it that way. But you don't get paid to be close. You don't get paid for what ifs. You get paid to win. So didn't work out. That's what it was.
And I think a good thing that we need to be very careful in defining the administration dropped the ball. What does that mean? It means that from many aspects, university level enrollment was going way down. That's a tough time for just the school in general. No new buildings were built. There was no vision from the administration. There was no desire to grow and expand and get bigger and better. The programs around the entire country were building indoor practice facilities and new locker rooms and this and that and everything in between and having state-of-the-art equipment. Marshall didn't do any of that. The biggest thing that they did was add in green helmets for one season and get rid of them. I mean, that was it. That was the only progressive thinking that Marshall had throughout that time span. So it's all boils down to money. If they would have invested administration level more money into the program as far as getting those things that recruits really cared about during that time, then it could have been a completely different story. I mean, it really could have. But you had a football stadium that was starting to show its age, and nothing was done to repair it, make it better. You had locker rooms that were old. You had no indoor practice facility at the time. It was just a grass field. So, as the entire country was moving forward, Marshall was just sitting there. Yeah. And for years, they just sat there until Mike Hamrick came along and he started to do some things. And then Spears overspent millions of dollars. We did a lot of things with him, a little too much.
Yeah, a little too much.
Yeah, but again, it was – I really don't put it all on Mark Snyder. I have to put it on the administration because, again, it all comes down to coaching. You need to do better on the field, have to have better talent and progressing those guys that you have in-house. But at the same time, how much better could have Marshall have been if they had what other programs in the Conference USA had? You're just fighting up an uphill battle from the very beginning of our tenure there. So I think it's important that we define what we mean whenever we say drop the ball. Money was not wisely spent. Enrollment was going down. The school itself was in trouble. It's a dark time.
Yeah, and it's just an era of what ifs. It's an era of could have beens, should have beens. I don't like those eras. I don't like hypotheticals. I like dealing in absolutes. And, at that point, you got so much potential to really break out and do things. They just didn't do it. And, I wish Mark Snyder nothing but the best. I think he's a great guy. I wish him nothing but the best and whatever else. I mean, as where he's coaching now, whatever, anything that he does, I hope he does well. And was he the right guy at the time? No, he wasn't. He was not the right guy at the time. Obviously, the results.
But who was?
Right. That's the thing. I don't know who was. That's what I mean, literally, I said it. I mean, I swear, I believe this with my full heart. If you had Bob Pruitt, if he had stayed those 5 years, I don't think he's much. I mean, I'm not saying he's 22-37, but he's not 94-23 like he was in the MAC. I can promise you that.
Right.
So you could have had. I mean, you could have had Nick Saban. You could have had. If you're in a bad situation, it takes a lot to get out of that, especially at that time when Marshall just did not have the resources and the all the things that they do now and the leadership and all the vision that they have now. They just didn't have that. I mean, you got to, like I said, cannot harp on this enough. You had a Hollywood feature film coming to your city. You had all this national publicity, all this national attention. You've got arguably the biggest movie star in the world in your town filming. How do you not do something with that? How does that not translate to more than it did? If that had happened now, if We Heart Marshall had been filmed now, the exact same situation with the leadership we got right now with Brad Smith and Gerald Harrison, my gosh, we would be worldwide on everything. We'd be everywhere, everything. Enrollment's already going up because of Brad Smith, but I'm saying it would be absolutely bonkers to see where our university would be right now if we had that leadership right now. But again, can't do nothing about it now because it's over. It happened. It just wasn't meant to be. Stars didn't align, that kind of thing. That's just the way it is. It is what it is.
No doubt. And one more thing, I know we're about to get off here in just a second, but you'd mentioned a moment ago, we do wish nothing but the best for Mark Snyder. Right now, he's going to be the new head coach of a brand new program, D3 Shawnee State, which is in Middle Ohio, which is honestly a really great fit. Mark Snyder's an Ohio guy, born and raised, Southern Ohio guy. So that's really close to home for him, number one. And again, there's no expectations. Nobody's expecting him to light the world on fire. This is a brand new football program, never had football in their entire history, I don't believe, as a university. I really do hope and wish him nothing but the best. I hope he's able to really just make a great program there. And who knows, maybe one of these days we'll take a trip up there to Shawnee State and watch some Bears football. We'll see. But again, looking over at Mark Snyder and his tenure, it was ups and downs, absolutely. But at the end of the day, it's a part of our history and it's a part of our story. And that's what just made the Doc Holliday era that much sweeter, from being down so bad to now being back. So, you have to go through those down moments to get to those high level moments. And so when we look back on Mark Snyder, don't look at it with, oh man, it's just terrible, horrible it was. But if it wasn't for that, then 2014 wouldn't have been as sweet as it was.
Nope. Exactly. You don't make a puzzle. It takes 1,000 pieces to put a puzzle together. And, it might not all be hunky-dory and peachy and great, but you got to do all those pieces, all them boring pieces, all that, what you got to do all that to put a puzzle together. And he was a part of our puzzle, so to speak. It is what it is. Can't take away from it. Like I said, wish him nothing but the best. So hopefully he does well where he is at now. And maybe this will help Herd fans think a little bit differently about him. Who knows? But with that being said, unless there's anything else you got to add, that will conclude it. So, got anything else?
Nope, I'm good. Go Herd.
All right, man. Well, we hope y'all enjoyed it. We would love to hear y'all's takes and opinions on the Snyder era. We've already got a few people talking about it on social media, so that's nice to see. So if y'all got anything you want to add, let us know. Shoot us a DM or a comment or whatever, and we'll talk about it. But thank you all for listening, and go Herd. We will see y'all later.